You think you've heard it all, right? Well, imagine this. Your mom, who can't see a thing, is accused of trespassing by a Karen who just so happens to live in the same HOA as you. Oh, and the best part? I'm the chief of police. Buckle up, this gets wild. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. Wait, what? How do you even pull that off legally? And how does she not notice? Well, it's a funny thing, really, living in a neighborhood with an HOA that's gotten so out of hand, you've got to make sure that the petty rules they make don't come back to bite you. The irony? The HOA is supposed to protect the neighborhood, but in reality, they've created an army of petty dictators. And they had no idea who they were dealing with when they messed with my mom. Let me set the scene for you. My mom, God bless her, lost her sight years ago, and now she gets around with a cane and her guide dog. She's tough, independent, and refuses to let her disability control her life. But in Karen's world? It was just another excuse to make an example of someone who didn't follow the rules. You know the type, always lurking for an opportunity to feel powerful by putting others down. So, one day, my mom is walking in the neighborhood like she always does, sticking to the sidewalks and using her cane to navigate. She's done this routine for years without any issues. But Karen, with her eagle eyes for suspicious activity, notices my mom's presence and decides she's trespassing. And not just trespassing, Karen claims my mom is somehow interfering with the community's landscape. Whatever that means. This whole thing was such a load of nonsense that I almost laughed out loud. But then I realized, this Karen had called the cop. My mom, who can't see the street signs, is suddenly being accused of breaking some HOA bylaws. And what's worse, Karen's ready to escalate the situation, just because she wants to prove that her self-appointed authority is real. You'd think the absurdity of the situation would be enough to stop this nonsense right there. But of course not. It gets worse. Karen's already dialing 911 by the time I hear about it from my mom. She's claiming that my mom is trespassing on private property and causing a disturbance. A disturbance? I mean, my mom's just walking down the street, minding her own business. This is what she's decided to get fired up about? What a waste of everyone's time. Naturally, I'm a bit more concerned than amused at first. I don't want my mom to get caught up in any unnecessary drama with the cop. She's not the one who should have to prove herself in front of some random Karen with a vendetta. But then, something clicks in my head. My mom isn't the one who needs saving here. It's Karen who's going to get a lesson, whether she knows it or not. After all, I'm not just some guy in this neighborhood. I'm the chief of police. And right now, I can't wait to see how this unfolds. So, I do what any self-respecting person would do in my position. I don't rush over to the scene like some white knight. Instead, I take a leisurely drive over, just to see how the disturbance is going to play out. As I pull up, I can already see Karen standing there like a proud rooster, chest puffed out, pointing toward my mom like she's the villain in some twisted fairy tale. I get out of the car and walk toward them, keeping my cool, but making sure every step shows I know exactly what's going on here. I get a good look at my mom, who's standing there with her cane, confused but calm as always. She's used to people misjudging her, and honestly, it doesn't bother her much. But she must have known this was more than just a misunderstanding. The moment I approach the cops, I see them stiffen. One of the officers looks up at me, his face going from neutral to shocked in a second. You see, he's not just seeing a random guy walking up. He's realizing who I am. And it's funny, because Karen has no idea who she's dealing with yet. I walk up to the officer, casually say, "Hey, what seems to be the problem here?" Karen's eyes widen as soon as she hears my voice. She can't believe it. Here I am, standing in front of her, Not just some bystander but the guy who makes the rules in this town. The power shift is instantaneous. She tries to hide her surprise behind a fake smile, but it's no use. Well, this woman has been trespassing on my property. She's causing a disturbance. I think she's dangerous, Karen stammers, clutching her clipboard like it's some kind of shield. The officer glances at me, then back at Karen, clearly trying to process the situation. "Chief," he says with an awkward nod. The whole situation just feels like it's spiraling out of Karen's control. She starts backpedaling, fumbling through her notes, trying to make her case, but nothing is sticking. "Oh, really?" I say, keeping my tone neutral. "I thought this was public property. No need for alarms here." And Karen? She just stands there, frozen. She's expecting me to get all defensive and start backing her up. But that's not how I roll. Instead, I start playing it cool, asking the officer why I wasn't notified about this so-called disturbance. Meanwhile, Karen is squirming, trying to come up with something, anything, that might make her look like she's got a reason to be mad. But nothing. I know I've got her. And the best part is, she doesn't even realize she's lost until it's too late. But just as I'm about to have the last laugh, something unexpected happens. The officer turns to me, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Chief, it seems Karen's been making a lot of complaints about various residents recently. Do you think maybe she's—" I don't even let him finish before the realization hits me. Karen's about to cause a whole lot more trouble than I anticipated. And as the cops turn their attention to her for the first time, Karen realizes, too late, that she's not just up against a random homeowner. She's up against someone with the power to end her reign of terror. But the story doesn't end here. Trust me. This is only getting started. And that's when everything starts to spiral. I could feel the tension building in the air as Karen's whole demeanor shifted. She knew exactly who I was now. But what she didn't know was just how much of a mistake it was to mess with my mom. As the awkward silence hung in the air, Karen's grip on her clipboard tightened. Her eyes darted back and forth, looking for an escape route. But it was too late. She'd already dug her hole, and there was no way out now. I leaned against the cruiser, casually surveying the scene. I could see Karen trying to maintain her composure, but she was visibly shaking. She had no idea how deep she was about to fall. She'd called the cops on my blind mom, accusing her of trespassing. On what, I still didn't know, but she hadn't realized the storm she'd just unleashed. As the chief of police, I had every right to take control of this situation, and frankly, I was enjoying watching Karen squirm. "You know, Karen," I said, keeping my tone light and almost mocking, "this whole trespassing accusation? It's pretty ridiculous, don't you think?" I raised an eyebrow, letting the question hang in the air like a subtle challenge. "My mom's been walking these streets for years. She's not exactly what you'd call a threat to the community." I looked over at my mom, who was standing a few feet away, trying to figure out what was going on. She was calm, her usual self, but I could tell she was a little worried. She didn't need this nonsense. None of us did. Karen's eyes flickered nervously as she tried to gather her thoughts. I'm just looking out for the neighborhood," she stammered. "She was walking on my property and—" I interrupted her with a small chuckle. "Your property? Are we talking about the sidewalk? Because last time I checked, the sidewalk is a public space, and last time I checked, no one can own the sidewalk." My sarcasm was dripping, and I could tell Karen was starting to lose her composure. The officer beside me shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing how badly this situation was going to backfire on Karen. I knew Karen wasn't used to being challenged. She had always been the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, barking orders at everyone and treating the HOA like it was her personal kingdom. But today, she was getting a reality check she wasn't prepared for. Karen tried to regain some control, but her arguments were falling apart, each sentence more nonsensical than the last. I'm just saying, people like her shouldn't be walking around without supervision, she sputtered. She could be causing trouble, you don't know. I raised an eyebrow, giving her a smirk. Oh, right, because a blind woman with a cane is a real danger to your pristine, perfect neighborhood, huh? I turned to the officers, who were clearly trying to hide their amusement. Maybe we should start arresting every elderly person who needs a cane to get around. It'll fix all the problems in the neighborhood, right? Karen's face flushed a deep shade of red, but she wasn't backing down. She was digging in her heels, convinced she was in the right, and I could see the gears in her mind spinning. She had nothing. No legitimate complaint, no real reason to have called the cops, and certainly no evidence to back up her accusations. All she had was a power trip, and it was about to come crashing down on her. The officer cleared his throat awkwardly. Chief, it seems like, well, Karen has had quite a few complaints about various residents recently. Maybe we should look into some of those. He was being cautious, trying not to make a scene, but the situation was becoming increasingly ridiculous. Karen had become the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer, making petty complaints about everything from the color of people's mailboxes to how many leaves fell in her yard. I didn't need to hear any more. Karen, I said with a sigh, putting on my most condescending tone, you've been making these complaints for months now, haven't you? Complaints that, let's face it, don't hold water. Maybe it's time someone reminded you what happens when you misuse your position. Karen's eyes widened as she realized where I was going with this. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. I leaned in closer, my voice low and steady. Let me remind you, Karen. The HOA doesn't give you the right to make up rules as you go. And calling the cops on people for walking on public property? That's not only ridiculous, it's an abuse of your power. You don't get to do that. For a moment, Karen just stood there, frozen. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. She'd been used to being in control, used to throwing her weight around and intimidating people into submission. But now? She was the one being questioned, and for the first time, she realized just how out of her depth she was. I took a step back, letting the words sink in. I'll be having a word with the HOA board about this little incident, Karen. And trust me, you won't like what happens next. Karen's face drained of color as she tried to protest, but it was no use. The damage had been done. Her credibility was shot, and the officers were beginning to see through her act. They'd dealt with her before, but this was different. This wasn't just another petty complaint, it was an attempt to make a scene, to exert control where there was none. And it was backfiring spectacularly. As I turned to walk away, I could hear Karen's voice rising in frustration, but I didn't care to listen. This wasn't her show anymore. I glanced over at my mom, who was standing a little further down the sidewalk. She was smiling now, relief washing over her. The worst of it was over, but the fight wasn't quite done yet. I still had to make sure Karen paid the price for what she'd done. Just as I was about to leave, the officer stopped me. Chief, I think we should really look into some of those other complaints Karen's been making, he said. There's more here than meets the eye. I nodded, already knowing where this was headed. The real fun was just beginning. As I walked away, a feeling of satisfaction washed over me. Karen had messed with the wrong person. And while this chapter was coming to a close, I knew that the fallout from this little incident would last much longer. What Karen didn't know was that I was just getting started. There was a whole lot more coming her way, and it wasn't going to be pretty. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about how sweet her downfall would be. But first, I had a few more moves to make. The next few days were a whirlwind. Word of Karen's latest stunt had already spread through the neighborhood, and people were starting to talk. I could practically feel the air getting heavier with tension as the residents began to realize that their self-appointed queen had overplayed her hand. Everyone knew Karen had a history of making petty complaints, but this was different. She'd crossed a line, and there was no way she was going to get away with it. I spent the next day meeting with the HOA board, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation. Of course, they were hesitant at first. Karen had a way of charming her way into people's good graces. But as soon as I started detailing her track record of complaints and how she'd abused her position, they started listening. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as I laid out how Karen had called the cops on my blind mother for simply walking on the sidewalk. It was absurd. Even they knew it was a problem. As the meeting wrapped up, the president of the HOA, a man named Greg, gave me a long look. "Chief, I'll have a word with Karen," he said, his voice hesitant. "But you know how she is. She's been here longer than most of us. She's got influence." I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. "Influence," I repeated. "What Karen has is a whole lot of people too afraid to stand up to her. But that ends today. If the board wants to keep its integrity, you've got to take action. She's making a mockery of you, and it's only a matter of time before the whole neighborhood sees it." Greg didn't argue. He knew I was right. The HOA had become a joke under Karen's rule, and if they didn't do something about it, they were going to lose what little credibility they had left. He promised to handle the situation, but I could tell from the look in his eyes that he was already bracing himself for the storm that was about to hit. Meanwhile, Karen was fuming. I could feel her rage simmering just beneath the surface every time I saw her. I could practically hear the gears in her mind turning as she plotted her next move. But what she didn't realize was that every time she tried to exert control, she was digging her own grave deeper and deeper. The next few days were filled with phone calls, meetings, and a growing sense of satisfaction that the tables were finally turning. Karen had made the mistake of thinking she could intimidate me, but she was about to find out that messing with my family was the worst thing she could have done. As the week wore on, I started to hear whispers from the neighborhood. People were starting to stand up to her, voicing their frustrations with her constant complaint. They were tired of the drama, tired of the endless rules she tried to enforce, and most importantly, tired of her thinking she was above everyone else. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. One afternoon, I received an email from her. It was long, full of convoluted reasoning and half-baked accusations, but the main gist of it was clear. She was demanding that I be removed from my position as chief of police because of a conflict of interest. She claimed I was using my power to target her, to harass her, and that I was abusing my authority. The audacity of it was almost laughable. I took a deep breath as I read through her email. She was desperate. She was grasping at straws, trying to find any excuse to justify her actions. But the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just about her getting embarrassed, it was about her trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She knew she was losing, and now she was going to try to pull every card she had left. I forwarded the email to the board, making sure they saw just how far Karen was willing to go to protect her fragile ego. Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long before Greg called me. "Chief," he said, his voice strained, "we've decided to hold a vote on Karen's membership. It's time for her to go. But we need you to be there. This has to be done properly." I smiled to myself. This was it. The final nail in Karen's coffin. The meeting was set for the following evening, and the whole neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew one thing. Karen wasn't going to get off easy. When the time came, I showed up with my mom in tow. She didn't need to be involved, but I knew she wanted to see justice served. As we walked into the HOA building, the tension in the room was palpable. Karen was sitting near the front, her arms crossed, glaring at anyone who dared to look her way. The rest of the board members were nervously shifting in their seats, unsure of how to proceed. But when they saw me, when they realized that I was there to make sure things went smoothly, they settled into their roles. The meeting started with the usual formalities, but as soon as the topic of Karen's behavior was brought up, the atmosphere shifted. One by one, the other residents began to speak up, voicing their frustrations with Karen's overbearing tactic. They talked about her constant complaints, her attempts to control every little detail of their lives, and how she had made the neighborhood feel like a prison. When it was finally time for Karen to speak, she stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "I've done nothing wrong. You can't do this. I've been a member of this HOA for years. You can't just throw me out because of some petty grudge." But the more she spoke, the more she dug herself into a hole. Her arguments were weak, her excuses transparent, and as the residents continued to speak out against her, it became clear that her time was up. When it came time for the vote, the results were unanimous. Karen was officially removed from her position as HOA president. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in months, there was a sense of relief in the air. People were free. They were no longer under the thumb of someone who thought they could control everything. Karen stood there, speechless, her face a mask of disbelief. She had lost not just her position, but the respect of the entire neighborhood. As the meeting adjourned, I walked over to her, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "You've got no one left to blame now, Karen," I said softly. "Maybe it's time to find a new hobby." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and stormed out of the room, defeated. I turned to my mom, who was beaming. "Well, that was satisfying," she said with a grin. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about making someone suffer, it's about watching them destroy themselves. Karen had tried to mess with the wrong person, and now she was paying the price. But the best part? The best part was knowing that we'd all be able to move on, free from her petty reign. As I walked out of the meeting, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was over. Karen was gone. And the neighborhood? It was ours again. The days following Karen's removal from the HOA were almost surreal. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for so long had lifted, and people were finally beginning to breathe easy again. It felt like we had reclaimed some sense of normalcy, but it was more than that. It was a victory. A victory over the oppressive force that had tried to control every little aspect of our lives. Karen's absence created a void, and it didn't take long before the dynamics in the neighborhood started to shift. People were talking more, laughing more, and, in some cases, they were actually interacting with each other in ways they hadn't done in years. The invisible weight of her petty authority had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, everyone seemed to be breathing a little easier. But as satisfying as it was to watch the neighborhood start to heal, I knew the fallout wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to just accept defeat and slink away into the shadows. No, she was already plotting her revenge. I could feel it in the air, a sense of anticipation that hung like a storm cloud. It was only a matter of time before she made her move. I wasn't exactly worried. After all, I had just orchestrated her downfall with relative ease, but the thing about people like Karen is that they never really go away. They regroup, they lick their wounds, and they come back with a vengeance. I knew that, and I wasn't about to let my guard down just yet. It wasn't long before the first sign of trouble came. It started as a small, seemingly innocent complaint. Karen had filed an official grievance with the city council, claiming that I had abused my position as chief of police by orchestrating her removal from the HOA. She accused me of using my authority to intimidate and harass her, a classic Karen move when she's backed into a corner. The complaint was laughable on the surface, but I knew it wasn't just about the HOA anymore. She was trying to drag me down, hoping that if she could make enough noise, someone would listen. I wasn't exactly concerned, but I also wasn't about to let this go unanswered. I'd handled the HOA drama, but I knew this had the potential to escalate into something bigger. I needed to play this carefully, make sure Karen didn't have any ammunition left to use against me. So, I sat down with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, and we discussed our options. Sarah listened to the details, raised an eyebrow at the absurdity of the complaint, and then nodded. "Let her have her fun for now," Sarah said with a grin. "We'll handle this the right way. You've got the law on your side. Let her throw her little tantrum. The city council will laugh her out of the room." I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Sarah was right. Karen had nothing. This was just her desperate attempt to get back at me, to make herself feel relevant again. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how pathetic her actions were. She was a woman who had used her position to manipulate, control, and belittle others, and now that she'd been exposed for it, she was trying to claw her way back into power through petty revenge. But just as I was about to dismiss the complaint as another one of Karen's futile attempts, things took an unexpected turn. A week after the city council received her grievance, I got a call from Greg, the former president of the HOA. He sounded nervous, almost as if he were afraid to speak. "Chief, I need you to come down to the HOA building," he said, his voice trembling. "Karen, she's doing something. I don't know how to explain it, but she's causing problems again." I didn't hesitate. I told him I'd be there in 10 minutes. As I drove to the HOA office, my mind raced. What could she possibly be doing now? I thought she was finished. When I arrived, Greg was pacing outside the building, looking more disheveled than usual. He seemed like a man who had seen his fair share of problems, but this was different. This was something new. "Chief, you've got to see this," Greg said, his voice low. He led me inside, and as soon as I stepped into the lobby, I understood the gravity of the situation. Karen was sitting there, but it wasn't just her. She was surrounded by a small group of residents, all of whom were giving me wary looks. It didn't take long for me to realize what was going on. Karen had rallied a group of disgruntled residents, people who had either been too afraid or too apathetic to challenge her before, and now she was trying to create a faction. She had positioned herself as the leader of this little rebellion, and she was using her so-called grievances against me to rally the troops. "Chief, I think you should leave," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This isn't your neighborhood anymore. You've overstayed your welcome." I couldn't help but smile. This was it. This was Karen's last-ditch effort to regain control, and it was pathetic. She was trying to play the victim, trying to paint me as the villain, but she didn't realize that her attempts at manipulation were falling apart. She had no power anymore. "Karen," I said, stepping forward with a calm but firm tone, "you don't get to come back here and play these games. You're out. You lost. The neighborhood is done with your nonsense." Karen's eyes flared with fury. "You think this is over?" she spat. "You think you've won? You've only made things worse for yourself. You've made enemies, and trust me, you'll regret this." I shook my head. "No, Karen. The only thing you've done is make yourself irrelevant. And that's what stings the most, isn't it? No one's listening to you anymore." The room went silent. The residents who had gathered around her looked uncomfortable, uncertain of what to do. It was clear they were starting to see Karen for who she really was, someone who thrived on drama, who needed conflict to feel important. And now that her reign of terror had ended, she was nothing but a hollow shell of her former self. Karen stood up, her hands shaking with rage. "This isn't the end," she muttered through clenched teeth. "You haven't seen the last of me." But I could see the defeat in her eyes. She knew she was done. She was a broken woman, trying to hold onto a power she no longer had. And it was almost sad to watch. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. "Don't worry, Karen. We're not afraid of you anymore." As I stepped outside, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. It was over. Karen had tried to fight back, but the truth was, she had nothing left. The community was moving on, and she was left in the dust, a relic of a time when she thought she could control everything. I knew there was no coming back for her. The neighborhood had been freed from her tyranny, and I had been the one to make sure it stayed that way. And that, my friends, was the sweetest victory of all.